I'm Megan Stikowski, and welcome to an HMC HealthWorks podcast. Today, we welcome back child psychotherapist Sarah Foe. Sarah spoke with us back in March of 2020, sharing her expertise on her child-centered approach and where we discussed the development of appropriate coping skills for anxiety, expressing anger, and frustration. Today, we are going to discuss what you are seeing with children and the constant challenge of staying connected with our kids and ourselves during this time of COVID-19. And also, you're going to be sharing lots of helpful information for parents and grandparents. So we are so pleased to have you back. Thanks for joining us, Sarah.
Oh, Megan, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the introduction. I'm really looking forward to our discussion today.
Great. Well, so this has been almost a full year since we spoke last. And it has been quite a year for you as well as all of our listeners. Would you share with us any changes that you've seen with your practice since we spoke last?
Sure. You know, Megan, I'm coming to you from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and in our area and with my colleagues as we work together kind of as this unit to support each other and the population in our area, with mental health support, we have noticed an increase in volume and referrals. Even just the other day, the New York Times had an excellent article about just really the demand for mental health support, not at one single age, but really looking at the broad spectrum from children to older adults needing and seeking to have just some feedback from or support for themselves through this time. Partly, a lot of the mental health right now, I am currently providing therapy for children and early adolescents through a telehealth, like Zoom, and many therapists are still doing that. It's been almost a year, and when we spoke back in March, we were just kind of launching into this new experience for many of us in the psychotherapy world, but now we're looking at just noticing just the regression, and we're going to talk a little bit more today about emotional age, anger, depression, and just concerns that families are coming to with referrals, specifically, as you mentioned, with children and adolescents.
Wow, well, I'm sure you have seen your Zoom appointments increase very much over the last year. And I know that your work with parents is equally as important as supporting the children that you have your appointments with. But really, what is the goal that you hear most often from parents?
Well, you know, many parents are noticing an increase in anxiety, but as well as they're seeing a regression, and they're like, boy, they're doing things they used to do when they were younger, whether it's putting their hands more in their mouth or just needing more extra hugs, being afraid. I'm speaking mostly for children in this discussion, this part right here, but even teenagers as well. But sometimes having fears possibly of going out of the house, and just feeling the parents are coming saying, boy, we used to see these things when they were younger. Why is it happening now? And that's that clumps into our emotional age. When we look at emotional age and how to support children, we look at them from in utero all the way till right now as adults. We have an emotional age, and we fluctuate depending on the stressors we encounter in our lives. And so COVID is a large stressor because it's affecting our social experiences. And for children, that's such a large chunk of their development and growth is in their social world. And so parents because their children have had limited or really no social experiences during this time, or inconsistent or incongruent social experiences, children are showing that they're having side effects, and side effects we're seeing are related to emotional age. I know I'm going to I keep mentioning those two special words, emotional age, but I promise listeners we're going to get into that in a little bit further. But it's something to think about because there's a loss that children are experiencing, a grief and loss. And we talked about this in March, the feelings of the loss of our daily routines and predictability, and as well as the rituals that we celebrate parts of our calendar year, whether it's holidays or birthdays. Those are milestones that children especially hold on to for the predictability and knowing what's ahead. And so that's something else that we kind of start to uncover as we meet with parents through the intake process and start therapy sessions with children, but as you mentioned, Megan, also with the whole family. We've we're supporting parents as well through this.
Emotional age is such an interesting concept. So what can you tell me about, the tools, the skills, the approaches you take with sessions with children and really provide the space for them to achieve emotional and chronological age?
Okay, and so that's the goal of therapy often is to get our chronological age, to say, your child is 8 or your grandchild is 8. We want their emotional age to match up with their chronological age. Just like we talk about, we sometimes seek support for our children if they have speech delays or gross motor delays. We have occupational therapy or their sensory needs. With emotional health is partly why parents seek out therapy services. We look emotional age. So as I mentioned earlier, Megan, I want to take us all the way back to in utero. So when a child is during the gestation period and before they're born and just those moments after they're born, we call that the do I exist period. That's like the acknowledgement that I am something for our children. And that is when a child is born. And parents probably remember when their child or their grandchild is laying there and their arms are kind of above their head and they're crying and they're like, help, I need help, when they're upset. What do we do as parents? We oftentimes scoop them up and bring them close to us and hug them tight and and we rock them and we sway back and forth, and we don't ask them like, what's wrong, what's going on. We just know to soothe them because we know they can't answer us. Well, when we see a child having a tantrum, especially right now, they are in their do I exist phase of development. They've regressed to that early emotional age. And so that's why we're like, oh, they're having a tantrum, but they won't listen to me and I can't reason with them and they're not using their skills, but I know that they have for problem solving. It's because they're in the emotional brain that they're in right then is their infant brain. And so the only thing we can do is help them regulate. And so as parents, part of supporting an emotional age is being the external regulator. And what that means is if you see them crying or having a tantrum or being upset, you can feel that they're spinning and feeling overwhelmed. It's oftentimes that they will let you, bringing them in and holding them tight and just giving them a hug and rocking with them until you can kind of feel them sigh and get back to be connected to self and then try to problem solve. So the goal is regulation, then communication. So, and sometimes kids don't want to be hugged. Sometimes there's other things going on. So you can be an external regulator without touching your child. You can stand in proximity, so near them, and just kind of rock back and forth like you would be holding them if they were a baby, and just letting them know, I see you. I see this is hard. And then truly not giving them too many words, taking some deep breaths for yourself, because as parents, witnessing our kids having a tantrum, especially when they're older, can be really hard and emotionally flooding for adults too. And so it's important for, us, and I'm talking just about the early emotional age, and there's other stages too, but this is the one truly that if we can do this, if we can recognize that children are regressing to this, like, do you see me? Do I exist? And helping them from there. The next emotional age we look at is the world okay. And that's like as children start to enter out into the world that they exist in, is the world a safe place for me to be in? Well, right now with COVID, it feels really incongruent. Kids are going to school, kids are back from school because there's an outbreak, so then they're in remote learning, then they're back in school. And that kind of incongruency can activate, is my world okay? Well, it doesn't feel consistent. It's unpredictable, and that can sometimes trigger kids to have higher anxiety, whether it's falling asleep at night. Maybe this is the kiddos I mentioned earlier don't maybe want to leave the house, where they usually would go, over to go for a car ride or to help pick up groceries or whatnot. They don't want to leave the house sometimes. You may notice that. And Megan, I was just going to mention one more, because I know I'm just going on and on here. The other one that I like to take a look at is, am I okay? And this is when we're kind of feeling like when we feel scared. We notice that we are, even as adults, like for example, and we can connect with this maybe as adults, when we have to do something like public speaking, when we have to speak out loud, or kind of like how I felt before this podcast, like, oh my gosh, I'm a little nervous. Am I okay? And then I have to say to myself, I am okay. Because as, grown-ups, we can regulate ourselves sometimes a little differently. But for children, when they're starting to feel like they're unsafe in their space, their world is not feeling consistent, and they're not and they're having a hard time feeling like they're seen in all of this, sometimes the other part of it is, am I okay? And that stage in life, typically emotional age is 18 months to 36 months. And so if you see your child feeling like, I'm not very good at this anymore, I'm not good at this, they won't like me, those kind of feelings of like, I'm not good enough or I'm not going to be liked for doing this, that is the am I okay stage. And so if you hear your child like, oh, I can't be on the screen, I can't say this to my teacher, it's probably going to be wrong, they're offering up to you, just letting you know, like, I don't feel okay. And so just sometimes saying, are you okay? I am okay. Like letting them know they are okay. So kind of just to review, it's like, do I exist? Is the very beginning one. So it's just a hug and a rock, and then, or just rocking externally, meaning like just standing away from them in their space, rocking and letting them know, I see you. I see you. You exist to me. Second one is my world okay? Letting them know the space that they live in. Even though it's incongruent in some areas, there are things that are consistent. You know, name the things that do happen all the time, the things that are predictable in your family, whether it's a meal, whether it's the time they have to go to bed, things like that. And then the last one is, am I okay? So those are the first three emotional age ones that we're really noticing a lot, and that's why parents often call in for their child to be referred for therapy.
Sarah, all of that has hit home so much for me, having a little one at home, and I hope it's enlightening for our listeners as well as much as it was for me. So thank you for sharing all of that. Unfortunately, we still have to address the pandemic a little bit more. Hopefully next time you join us, we won't have to. But I know we discussed last time supporting children with anxiety and anger and frustration. But this time, can we talk a little bit about those three emotions as well, but around the restrictions and the constant changes that are happening? You know, we have kiddos that are in school for a little bit, and then they're home for a little bit, and maybe they're able to see their friends for a couple weeks, but now they aren't. So, you know, how can you support those children and those feelings?
So this is where I'm going to talk about, I used the word earlier, dysregulation and regulation. And so we probably heard it, we probably even use the pretty mainstream words. They're pretty big in the mental health community as far as how we describe and some theoretic models of how we describe our behaviors and what we're experiencing, because it is physiological. It's what's happening in our bodies being dysregulated, but it's connected to our feelings. So if you think about our brain, we have our left side of our brain and our right side of our brain. And the left side of our brain is doing our thinking, our thoughts, our logic, problem solving. And I'm simplifying this as well, maybe just for our discussion today. But there's a lot of more complexity, of course, to our brain, as we know. But in the right side of the brain is our emotional side of our brain, our feeling side of the brain, our creativity side. And so if we think, we want to be able to connect our right and left part of our brain. And so when we are feeling dysregulated, we're feeling disconnected from our right part of our emotional self. And so when we notice anxiety, depression, as I mentioned earlier, and even like an increase in anger, those are oftentimes because we are feeling disconnected from self. We're dysregulated. And it's very much part of our neurologic part of our brain feeling like it's not connected to the rest of ourselves. And so to help support that, there's a couple strategies we can do. Noticing if your child, this kind of branches from adolescence, as we talked about earlier, or in early childhood, as we talked about earlier, knowing that there's two sides we want to look at. There's a hyperarousal. This is when you see your kiddo and you're like, they are bouncing off the walls. It's bedtime and they're like hanging off the bed. They're jumping around. They want this. And just like feeling like it's like a really intensity, or if like you tell them, time to keep going, and they're just everywhere. That's that hyperarousal. They're feeling anxious, and it's coming out in a hype. We would use the word often in our culture, hyper, right? They're moving around. It's very active. Sometimes tantrums fall into this side, and we're like, they are expressing it very physically in their environment. Where hypoarousal is, we'll notice kind of like a numbness. You may even notice like your teenager puts their hood up and kind of slouches down, or it could be not even a teenager, a teen or a tween as well. But also we're maybe noticing kind of a lifelessness. We kind of notice that their shoulders are hunched. They kind of feel like they have low energy. Sometimes when children are having a tantrum, they even will shift into this hyperarousal when things become too much. And that's exactly the key word, is too much. When we are overwhelmed, the hyperarousal is that it's our brain's safety mechanism saying, hey, this is so scary. You need to preserve your energy. You need to stay safe. Don't move. And so when you're in the hyperarousal, you're still kind of moving around, freaking out. So both are dysregulated. And so how can we support this? There's a lot of great resources that we can use, and each child has its own specific thing that they probably will find that fits for them. But I'm going to give you some examples. You can kind of experiment. And I offer to parents, when they're in the hyperarousal or the hypoarousal state, nervous system state, to not ask the question if they want to do the intervention to support their nervous system. I offer it. Like, here's a glass of water. A glass of water and a crunchy snack are one of the best ways to get your kiddo back in their thinking brain and connect to self. As you mentioned earlier, Maggie, we're talking about connecting to self. Mm-hmm. We can do this as grown-ups too. We've been on the screen for 6 hours in a day. If you get a glass of water and something crunchy, that is a way to get our body to reconnect with our body. That's just one step. But for kids, just offering it when they're done with their screen, so they have screen time or school time, just sitting it next to them, like, there's water there, there's a pretzel, there's a carrot stick, there's, whatever is something that's crunchy, it's giving feedback. It's getting us back in our body. Some other ideas too, I was mentioning earlier, before bed and they're hanging off the bed, I highly encourage letting kids that are hypoaroused to let them, if it's safe, and with spotting, to hang off the bed. Just hanging upside down for kids, or putting themselves in the yoga position where they're downward dog, where their head is down and their legs are up. That is a great way to help ourselves get back online. In fact, as I'm talking to you, Megan, I'm like putting myself in that position, which is, you guys can't see me, but I'm doing it. And, another great example of some ways to help when we're feeling dysregulated is just to squeeze our arms and squeeze our fingers like tight fists, and kids can just kind of punch forward, but not hit anything, but just punching forward just to get that release, and almost like you're flicking water with your fingers. Mm-hmm. Movements can be a really helpful way to reconnect with self in these moments. Sometimes parents cueing, I'm pushing my feet to the ground. This is really hard right now to watch. I know you're really upset. I'm pushing my feet into the ground. Parents can model this while their child is having, a high anxiety moment or a high anger moment where it feels really intense. This is a way for parents to meet their child in their aroused, in their feeling that aroused feeling, that really strong feeling, but also to stay grounded, because children sometimes need us to be their external regulator. And I know I keep saying that word over and over during our time, but those are just a few examples. And Megan, I was going to, I know there's a few more out there that I do want to share for other ways parents can help. Sometimes we can think about prevention. So what are some ways that we can prevent, we don't have to always do these things in the moment. And so that could be sometimes humming. I know people like to hum, they do things around the house or go somewhere or driving. Humming is a really great way to support our nervous system and for emotional regulation. Gargling, interestingly enough, is a really great way too. Sometimes to just massage with your kids, provide massage for them. They can provide massage to you. It's a great way to connect and attach after a day. And sometimes laughter and just those social connections at home are also great ways to strengthen our emotional health.
Those are really wonderful tips. I do want to take a moment to remind all of our listeners that they're not in this alone. And while, Sarah, you provided such great advice and techniques for people to use, please keep in mind that there are child therapists and adult therapists located all over the United States, and they're available to help you.
That's really true, Megan. And there's also, on that note, there's virtual sessions are oftentimes, I know in our area, as I mentioned, Pittsburgh, many of the insurance companies are covering, providers are covering telehealth copays and deductibles. I'm not sure how long, it's variable. It depends on who your insurance carrier is, but it's something to look into because sometimes it's hard when we work jobs to be able to run our kiddo over to a therapy session, then also to pay a copay or deductible. It's really there's a lot of steps involved, but luckily during this time, providers are often therapists are available online, and there's not a copay or it's because of the insurance. Again, I'm speaking just to insurance companies that I know in our area. But it's something to look into if you're curious about, looking for something further or more additional to help support your child during this time. And, taking your child or having them talk to a therapist also normalizes the therapy experience. It's part of our, we take care of our physical health. We go see a PCP. We make sure our kiddos have checkups. So this is also teaching kids that mental health is just as important, and that if you're having a hard time, seeking out mental health support can be something that's normative for them throughout their entire lifetime. So you're kind of modeling that healthy habit.
Yes, another excellent point. Thank you so much, Sarah, for your time and your expertise, and we look forward to hosting you again.
Megan, thank you so much for having me. I really look forward to these opportunities, and hope we can talk sometime soon.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for listening, and stay tuned for more HMC HealthWorks podcasts.